Okay, let's dive right into this. We all have a cabinet at home, right? It's full of products we use every single day. Shampoo, soap, you name it. But what if I told you that inside every single one of those bottles is a hidden link to one of the biggest challenges facing our planet? Today, we're going to uncap that connection between the products you use and the growing crisis of global water scarcity. So, let me just ask you straight up. What on earth could your shampoo have in common with a global drought? And, the answer's way more than just water as an ingredient. It's actually a story about risk, about supply chains, and about a new push for transparency that affects what you can buy, and even if it'll be on the shelf tomorrow. So here's our game plan. We're going to start with the big picture, this crisis of scarcity. Then we'll zoom right in on the household products industry. After that, we'll talk about a really important standard for transparency, figure out how water risk is actually measured, and then finally, see how all that data turns into real-world action. First up, a crisis of scarcity. To really get the risk to a single company, we first have to wrap our heads around the scale of this global challenge. So what's really driving all this? Well, it's basically a perfect storm. You've got rapid urbanization, which means more and more people clustered in cities, all needing water. At the same time, our global population is just getting bigger, so consumption is going up. And get this, we're draining our planet's underground water savings accounts, these things called aquifers, way faster than nature can refill them. And layered on top of all of that, more droughts and the huge impacts of climate change. All right, so with that huge global context in mind, let's bring it all the way down to the industry itself. This is where we see how that massive pressure brings the water crisis right into our homes and into our bathrooms. Okay, so here's the crucial point for this industry. It's what you'd call a dual dependency. Water isn't just in the shampoo. A lot of the time it's the #1 ingredient on the label. But it's also the absolute lifeblood of the factory, used as a coolant to keep all the heavy machinery from literally melting down. If you lose access to water, your entire production line can just grind to a halt. And this quote right here, it just says it all. This isn't some abstract warning about the environment. This is a straight-up business threat. Think about it. If the factory making your favorite soap is in a region that suddenly has to ration water, production could just stop. And that means higher costs for the company, which could mean higher costs for you, or the product just vanishes from the shelves completely. So if the risk is that serious, how do investors, or heck, how do we, know which companies are actually paying attention? Well, that brings us to a huge part of the solution, creating a standard for transparency. And that's where something called SASB comes in. SASB, that stands for the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, basically creates a framework so companies have to report on risks like water scarcity in a way that's clear and that you can compare apples to apples. The easiest way to think about it is like a standardized report card for sustainability. It forces companies to show their work and makes these risks visible and financially real, not just for Wall Street, but for all of us. And the process is super methodical. First, the standard basically defines an industry, right? Then it pinpoints the most important sustainability topics. And for this one, water management is, you guessed it, right at the top. Next, it lays out specific, clear metrics for reporting. No wiggle room. And finally, it gives technical guidance so everybody is measuring the exact same thing in the exact same way. It's all about creating clarity from chaos. Okay, so let's get into the nitty-gritty. How do these standards actually put a number on something as massive as water risk? Let's take a look at how they actually measure the flow. The key idea here is a term called baseline water stress. It's a pretty simple concept, but it's incredibly powerful. Think of it like a region's water budget. It just measures how much water everyone is taking out versus how much renewable water nature is putting back in. It tells you if a region is living within its means or if it's heading for a serious overdraft. So when a region is using somewhere between 40 and 80% of its available supply, that's considered high water stress. Now for a business, operating here is kind of like running your factory on a phone that's perpetually in low power mode. Yeah, it works, but any surprise demand or problem could shut you right down. It's just a constant nagging risk. And then there's this. When withdrawals go over 80% of the renewable supply, well, that's extremely high water stress. This isn't low power mode anymore. This is the critical battery warning, that flashing red light. A region like this is burning through water way faster than it can be replaced. For a business that depends on water, setting up shop here is a massive gamble. So when you boil it all down, after all that technical stuff, the SASB standard is really just asking companies two very basic questions. First, how much of your water is being used in these risky, high-stressed areas? You gotta give us the numbers. And second, and this is the most important part, what's your plan? What are you actually doing to manage that risk? And that second question is where everything comes together, isn't it? Because just having the data is only step one. The real goal is to drive change. And that brings us to our last section, from data to action. You see, companies are feeling the pressure from two different sides. On one hand, you have the physical risks. A really bad drought literally shuts down your factory, period. But on the other, you've got regulatory and reputational risks. A government could hit you with huge fines for overusing water. Or maybe even worse, customers could decide to boycott your brand because they see you as being wasteful. Either one of those can crush your bottom line. So what does taking action actually look like? Well, this is the kind of stuff companies now have to report on. It could be making their factories way more efficient with water recycling. It might be pouring money into R&D to create shampoos that need less water to begin with. It could be big investments in new tech. And critically, it often means working hand in hand with local communities. Because at the end of the day, water is a shared resource. Transparency is what forces these kinds of actions to be taken seriously. And all of this brings it right back to us. Because now that you can see the straight line from the bottle in your cabinet to the water stress in a community maybe halfway around the world, the real question is, what are you going to expect from the brands you trust and bring into your home? It's a question that's only going to get more and more important.